So, hi everyone, and welcome to the Talking Wheels podcast. It's the weekly Speedway podcast that comes out with you every Saturday. I'm your host, Michael Ryde, Ryde74 on Twitter. And I've got my co-host as well, Lynn. I'll let Lynn say hello for herself.
Hi, I'm Lynn Murray. I'm just a Speedway fan. I've only been on a Speedway bike once.
Well, Lynn is not just a Speedway fan, by the way, and as you'll find out if you've not seen any of these before, she is also something of a private investigator. So, not to make the guests nervous at all, and then to welcome really. So a big thank you. We have been appealing for people to come forward so that we can get more people on our list to interview, and you know, people who are interested to the Speedway public and beyond, hopefully. So we have with us today, well, I will let him tell you more about himself, but a man of many talents. Very much involved in Isle of Wight Speedway, co-promoter of the Wizards, and it's Barry Bishop. So, hi, Barry.
Yeah, hello. How are you doing? Yeah, as you just said, I'm Barry Bishop. I'm the co-promoter of the Warriors, and I do that along with Martin Widman. So, you know, most people see me as the front man, and Martin very much is an equal partner in everything that we do. So, yeah, he's equally as responsible for the crazy mayhem that we produce on the island.
So how did, just to start us off then, how did you get into the Speedway? How did you get into involvement at Isle of Wight? Where did this all start?
Okay, so I've been going to Speedway ever since I was in a pram, mainly Oxford. Oxford's, even though, you know, my heart is on the island, Oxford is always my club, and I'm delighted to see them come back. And you know, proud for everybody that did that work so hard to save the stadium. And of course, we were actively involved in that with matches against Oxford Cheaters to ensure that their profile maintained really high all the time. So yeah, long and the short of it was, when I was 16, I joined the Navy, and I was a submariner till I was 30, based all across the country, obviously up in Faslane and down in Gosport. And I kept my touch with Speedway all that time, and then actually I had cancer, believe it or not. And when my dad came down to see me in the Naval Hospital, Haslar, I said to him, you know what, if this is going to take me, I'm going to ride a Speedway bike. And to cut a long story short, I then contacted Peter Wight out of the Speedway Star, who was not the promoter of Berwick at the time. He was selling a Westlake, and I drove up with my dad as soon as I was released from hospital and bought a Speedway bike. And my plan was just to ride one. Then, of course, you want to get in the Speedway Star. Then you want to get in a team. Then you get 2 bikes. Then you get a van. Then your wife says she wants to divorce you and all that. We didn't get divorced over it, but all that kind of good stuff. And then I rode Speedway on the island, down at Exeter for the Devon Demons. Lots and lots of amateur stuff. Always riding at Oxford the second halves, and Coventry when I could, Eastbourne. And then my naval career ended, and I then went into different jobs, and I was working actually in New York of all places when the call came through from a guy called Kev Shepherd and said, do you want to get involved in the Isle of Wight? And there's only one reason why someone in Speedway asks you if you want to get involved in something, and that means they want money out of you. And I asked him the position of the club, and I won't divulge what that was, but it wasn't for me at the time, shall we say. And then unfortunately, the club, as we all know, folded. And then Kev, a year later, called me again and said, oh, we're having all these meetings. Would you like to come down and participate in a fans meeting, you know, supporters club meeting? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. You know, if there's a chance to bring it back, you know, I'd love to be involved. And a guy picked me up who was in the RAF, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this out there in podcast land, but I really hope that you do one day. And I got in this car, and I immediately liked this man so much. He was ex-RAF, I was ex-Navy. He runs a scout group. I was the chairman of Sea Cadets. We both had this view of how Speedway should be run, about involving the youth, about creating a product, blah, 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 blah. And his name was Martin Widman.
Aha.
And so Martin used to pick me up, because Martin lives in Leicester, in Loughborough, and I live just outside Chipping Norton. And we came down for these supporter club meetings, and it kind of became, I don't want to be disrespectful, but it was the same meeting time after time after time. And I didn't think we progressed anywhere. And on the way back after the 4th or 5th, I said to Martin, you know what, I don't think this is for me. Anyway, as we stopped outside my house, I looked around and to Martin, I held out my hand and I said, "But I'll do it with you." And he took it. And that's how we applied to be promoters of the Isle of Wight, and how we're still here like this now. Madness, isn't it?
No, I know what you mean. I'm trying to do similar things in Speedway with Glasgow and promoting youngsters and things like that. And like you, I don't have pots of money. It's just doing what you can to promote things. I'm attending an event on Saturday to promote Speedway amongst particularly youngsters. You're doing a lot with the youngsters. You've got a kind of Speedway school, is that right?
Yeah, we do have a Speedway. I mean, we firmly wanted to change the demographic of Speedway from day one. And what I mean by that is, if you go to most tracks around the UK, the demographic is, you know, at least 40 upwards. And I can remember when I went to Speedway, I had, me too. I had my group of friends that went to Speedway who were totally different from my group of friends at school, who were totally different from my group of friends at Sea Cadets. And that just shows the amount of kids that went there. And so when we decided to run and we had permission to start, we decided from that point we would never charge for children age 16 and below, and we don't, and we won't. And so we actively encourage them. And so what that does by doing that is we have one of our volunteers who is responsible for going to scout groups, to boys brigade, to schools, and they take one of our My First Skid bikes in there, and or one of our riders, junior riders, will go, and we ultimately we call it bring my class, basically, and we allow the entire class or the entire scout group or the entire boys brigade or girl guides or whatever to come along with their parents free of charge. And that's always had a great return. It's a great success rate. And some of the greatest pictures that we have, I can remember one quite vividly, is Ben Morley being surrounded by kids, you know, and what I used to do is I'd pick up tear-offs off the track and I'd wash them, and then at half time I'd go down and I say, "Come on kids, Ben Morley has actually touched this tear-off. You want it, and you want to get it signed by him, and you want to put it on your wall." And I would always give them all away. And another thing that I did, and I remember this quite well, was when I went to Speedway, we would always crush a can on our left foot and walk around, you know, to make the noise of a steel shoe. And I can remember outside our little burger bar place that we've got, there was a group of kids there, and I said, "Why haven't you got your steel shoes on?" And they all looked at me as though I was outrageous, because I'm always dressed in yellow and blue anyway. You know, I look a bit like Mr. Tumble, or something warrior related. And I got a can of Coke and I drank it, and I crushed it and put it on my left foot. And the following week, I saw children with a Coke can on their left foot pretending they were steel shoes. And I thought to myself, yes, that's a result. And that means that they buy in, you know, they buy in. We do also lots of activities for the kids, you know, and that's everything from giving free whistles. I mean, you could buy whistles from China for £3.90 for 150 of the things, order them in advance. They take 10 weeks to get there. We give them away, you know. We sometimes give away handheld air horns. We always give a lolly or something. We also have a healthy menu in our burger bar, which parents really value. We also want to ensure that our menus are cheap enough for a family of 4 to actually come to Speedway, have something to eat, and it'll all be under 40 quid. And that's achievable, and you can still make money. So we prime that, because I want people to come every week, not just once and then leave. So that's always been what we've always targeted, and it's worked quite well so far. So we do have a different demographic to most clubs, and in that we do have a lot of youth. And of course now, since we stand alone from the BSPL, we could do a lot more youth racing in our meetings, because you know, and I really hope that the BSPL and other people pick up on the successes of this, which I'm sure that they watch us all the time, so hopefully they will, because I want little Mary in the crowd to see little Johnny on his Pee-wee out on his bike, whizzing around the track, getting the round of applause, being the ride of the month by their sponsors, who are actually Birmingham fans, who give them 15 or 20 quid for being ride of the, not the month, the week rather. And that then little Mary rides a Pee-wee, and replaces little Johnny, because little Johnny's now replaced little Freddie, who's riding a 125, and little Freddie's gone up to a 500 and replaced, you know, Barry. And so that's the, you know, that's the conveyor belt of riders, and we involve them in every single Speedway meeting that we do. And so that's where you get your kind of, it's almost like your youth football fan base, you know, as well, because if little Mary's riding, mum and dad are coming as well, and then granny and granddad, then Auntie Joan and all the rest of them, they're all coming to watch little Mary. And so it pays for itself and actually adds to the product.
It does. I've been following the youth Speedway in the mainland UK, and I've been following them around Berwick and Edinburgh and Glasgow so far. And there's a lot of promise there. And this year, I have noticed quite a distinct improvement in what they're doing, how they're organising it.
Yeah.
And it might well have come from yourselves, because they've got a Speedway school at Edinburgh, they've got one at Scunthorpe, and I can't think of where else they've got one. But it's something that we need to raise the profile.
Yeah, I agree. But you've got two different things, right? You've got Speedway schools, and then you've got practice sessions, and they're two different things. So what I try to achieve is I want to teach people how to ride. Firstly, we have for example, we have little revies, you know, they're little thick-wheeled electric bikes where we can start kids from 3 and 4. You know, that's where I want them. And then we teach them how to ride the motorcycle. We teach them how to lay the bike down, for example, as well. We teach them, you know, how to, and so I know that I can teach anybody to ride a Speedway bike and make it slide. That's not difficult to do. But then what you've got to do is, when you've got to that point, you must, and this is where Neil Batcher's doing a great job as well, is you must teach them to race. And that's entirely different. And then you go from the youth series, where actually mum and dad are probably paying for them to enter. And then you go to professional or semi-professional, when you're racing for money. And that's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
That's really dog eat dog. That's not out for fun. That's not a Sunday ride in the park or a motocross bike or something like that. That's where someone's livelihood, or part of their livelihood, depends on where they finish in every race. And so we make our schools fun. We make it very inclusive, which is why we have lots of ladies, female riders come through our school. And everybody, regardless of ability, will feel like a superstar when they leave our Speedway school. Everybody. And we run them quite strictly. Everyone will say that, but actually people want that. They want structure, because everybody has an equal amount of rides. It's very rapid. You know, it's constant track time. So yeah, we're very proud of them. And when you spoke about the youth series, we actually staged. I'm a little bit disappointed that, but I understand the reasoning for it, that the British youth didn't come and spend their weekend training camp with us, because we did it for 3 years on the bounce.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. We were all day Tuesday, a day in the classroom, and we got them access to a gym. We got them a nutritionist, you know, and I was walking around with these young riders and saying, William Cairns, William, come and stand over by that wall. And he'd stand by the wall, and I say to him, I want you to talk about a scarf for 2 minutes. And he'd look at me like I'm a nutcase. And I sit them down, and I said, the reason why I asked you that is because one day you're going to be on television, and you're going to be interviewed. And that interviewer is going to say, what was the race like, William? And if you go, okay, that's not a representation of yourself or your sponsors or your team. You've got to be explained why you did well, why you didn't do so well, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just simple stuff that I learned in the military that really can bring people out of themselves. You know, I can remember my one in the military was I was asked to talk about setting up a goldfish tank, you know, for 3 minutes, you know, pulled to one side. And so I learned that from there, and I did it to these kids. And by the end of the weekend, you know, they were almost hanging around for me to ask them to do something, you know. And it just it helps them gain in confidence, gain in, you know, if they didn't do very well first time and then they do really well on the fourth time, how are they going to leave? They're going to leave thrilled, aren't they?
Yeah.
I really like that. I really like that, Barry. And one thing, you know, when looking on the social media, I mean, I'm ex-military myself. I'm ex-Air Force. I had 12 years as a medic in the Air Force, and I've worked at, well, I've been on courses at Hasler. And as you say, there's something around, not just the bit around the sport, but the person. And what I noticed on your social media, you were talking about, you know, almost how to help people to ride bikes, but to be great citizens. I think that's the direct quote from what you put on one of your posts. And I really like that. And I suppose it's a bit like, not the same, but football with academies and trying to educate the players as well as help them to be good skilled and become independent young people. A bit like basic training, I guess, but in a really potted version. So I'm just wondering, is the demographic, you've obviously got quite a younger one, is that reflective of the population on the island? I mean, confessing to not knowing the demographics of Isle of Wight as well, but it's
actually totally the other way around. People come to Isle of Wight to retire.
Right. So you're doing really well to get to that audience.
And I mean, to go back to the schools, you're absolutely right. It's not just about, you know, if one of them make it. I mean, we do have someone who's come from the school who's ridden for the Warriors, and so Morgan Williams, and we've got another young lad now, Kai Elliott, who started on a Pee-wee and is now going to be on 500s this year. So that gives us a great sense of pride, you know. And so, but apart from that, we want them to be successful in the sport. We want them to make a living from it one day. We want them to be world champion. I actually want them to create rounded people that are actually, they know that if any, for example, we have a really strict policy of if anyone, and this is at any level, disrespects any of our staff, they're invited to leave immediately, no second chances. And do you know how many times anyone's done that? That will be zero, because before I start, I say this in our safety brief. And I treat every single rider exactly the same. So quite funny, one time James Shanes rode past me, and the rule is you don't ride past me, because when we're busy, we're bringing the next lot on. I had to stand them and make sure that all the kids could hear me saying to James, don't do that again, don't ride past me, you know. And afterwards he come down and he said to me, oh, I'm really sorry about that. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry, but I had to tell it to you, because if I say it to the kids, then they're quite within their rights to say to me, well, James Shanes did it. And so you know, you can't have one rule for one and another for another someone else. And you do see that at schools, and we don't do that at all. And so, but we also teach them engineering. You know, we have working parties where the kids come, and we, you know, little things like we've taught them how to drive a dumper, or we taught them how to drive the Bowser. So I've had a 12-year-old driving the Bowser, you know, and none of the kids stored it, believe it or not, because they're used to what, you know, how a clutch works and things like that. So it's a kind of, it's right, thanks for coming and helping us load that dumper all day. I'm going to take you out the track now, and we're going to do 4 laps, and you're going to drive the Bowser around, putting the water down. Why? Because I want him to love it. And you know, if he doesn't make it as a speedway ride, or decides he doesn't want to do it anymore, he might want to come and help one day, and he might want to drive the Bowser, because we planted that seed in his mind straight away. Yeah,
because not everybody can be a speedway rider, but you can still help speedway the sport.
Yeah, correct.
In other ways, you know.
And there's also different levels of speedway. Of course, there's a very vibrant amateur scene, and you know, speedway mixes hand in hand with grass track as well, which is even bigger weekend scene. So whilst they might not want to commit to riding for a club home and away all the time, they may want to do grass track on a Saturday and Sunday, or speedway on a Saturday and Sunday. But as their home club, they may also want to get involved at a different level, pits marshal, clerk of the course, all of that kind of good stuff. So and without them, of course, we're just a stadium with a speedway track, because we can't function.
Yeah. So I don't quite understand what went on as to why the Isle of Wight is separate from the rest of the speedway divisions. It can't be pure geography, because they've been there before.
Correct. It's not pure geography. And this is you know, this is actually a pretty, it's an out there topic, and so nothing I say is probably news to anybody. But we felt 2 years ago that the points limit of 35 for the National League wasn't an appropriate level for our track and our fans as a product. And so now, even though we felt that, there was not an AGM. And normally there was an AGM where all of the promoters would gather together, and the chairman would propose, okay, so this is proposed that we're going to reduce the points limit for the better of the sport to 35, and we would debate it. And we would then vote to it, and it could be that we voted yes in 35, my fellow promoters, because they hopefully would have convinced me and I'd have bought into it and I'd have done it. But how it happened was there was no AGM. We were told that you accept this or you leave, blah, blah, blah. And so we said, okay, if we accept it this year, next year, will there be an AGM for the National League? And we were told that they couldn't guarantee that. So what that actually means is members of the BSPL are companies that sit underneath another company called the BSPL. And because you're a member of that company, the directors of the BSPL, those that sit on the top table, can control your business, and there's nothing you can do about it. So effectively, what they were saying to me was, and to Martin, was to put on a product that we didn't believe in, to generate riders for the higher leagues that we have to pay them to do and probably lose money. And I couldn't agree to that. You know, we always cut our cloth. We don't owe anybody anything. We always pay our bills, and we're really proud of that. And we reinvest everything that we make back into the stadium or into Speedway School. And so for me, it was the right move. And so Martin and I very regretfully decided to leave. And of course, you know, there was other things that went along around the fact that we didn't actually speak to the chairman, or we didn't feel like anybody was interested in whether we stayed or not. And the National League actually has a greater problem in that at the moment there's only one standalone club, which is Mildenhall. Yeah. So actually Mildenhall is in a terrible position, because all of the other clubs, their promoters will attend the Premiership and the Championship League AGMs. And as a National League promoter, you're not allowed to attend it. You have a standalone one. And so they will make the decisions for Mildenhall, and Mildenhall will not have a say. They might think that they will, but they won't. It will be made for them. No, I know the people at Mildenhall, and they're great. And same as you know, all the other standalone National League clubs. But you can't say to people, okay, if you take us for example, it costs us about £5,000 to put on a Speedway meeting. So you have to get that back through sponsorship and gate money. You know, our ferries, our first aid, insurances, BSPL fees, referee fees, so on and so forth. And rider money. It's a big deal. And so you have to have a product that works to attract the fan base. And we felt at the time that 15 races of what effectively was MDL standard at the time wouldn't have been good enough. We couldn't have had the likes of Ben Morley, for example, in my view, riding against you know, Morgan Williams, because Ben would finish 3/4 of a lap in front of him. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way to Morgan, but at the time that would have been the case. Now Morgan's, of course, is a greater improved rider. So for me, it just didn't stack up. Now, one way it would have worked, of course, is we actually run a handicap Speedway meeting on the island, which is a 3-point rider starts at the start finish line, 5 points and above starts at 15 meters, and 8 and over starts at 30 meters. Now, if you want entertaining Speedway, that's what you need to look at. And you know, I encourage anyone to look at our videos of that. I think we had 60 passes in the first one and 50 odd passes in the second one. And it teaches riders like Morgan how it feels to be the first in the bend and have the whole track to yourself, and the wind in your goggles instead of shale. And it teaches Ben Morley how to re-overtake people. So it's a really great educational tool for the sport. And so certainly at our level, it was very successful.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think some of the most entertaining Speedway I've seen is where riders have come from behind.
Well, actually, in our we do have team meetings, of course, this year, which is a 3-team tournament, which is ourselves, Cradley, and Weymouth, and we have so many different rules that we've interjected. So, for example, the away team manager can pick a rider to start off of a handicap in any race he chooses after heat 3, and so that means the team manager then has to think about something. You know, he thinks about, okay, which race do I think we've got a chance, and who should I handicap? Yeah, and he can handicap any one of the 4. So you might want to make sure that the reserve won't catch his reserve, for example. or he might want to handicap their highest averaged rider. So each team manager will handicap one rider once, and you can only have one handicap in a race. So that means 6 of our races will have a handicapped rider in without a taper fence. And the other thing that we do is the last 3 heats, we allow the team that's the least scoring at that time to pick their first 2. The team that's leading at that point to pick their riders in heats, whichever heats they're selected to go into. And then the second place team, so he might think, oh, I don't want to ride against Ben and Alex in heat 1. I'll put my 2 strong boys in heat 13. But that means that then the last place guy can see which ones out of all of the races he can put his riders against. So he can hopefully pick, in inverted commas, the weaker races against his stronger riders. And that worked really, really well as well. So it's giving team managers something to do, because let's be honest, a team manager, other than motivation, nowadays doesn't really have a lot to do at Speedway meeting, particularly at National League level, where there's no tactical substitutes and things like that.
Yeah. Yes. You mentioned there about you at your schools and your skid meetings that you have the nutritionist there.
No, we did that. Sorry, for
the young lions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you thought of doing the nutrition and cooking yourself? I see you
well,
a
actually,
bit of a fan of offal.
I do like a bit of offal, strange you say. Yeah, I do eat some exotic foods. And actually, one thing that we do at the school, believe it or not, is as part of your package, we give everybody a free meal after it as well. Why do we do that? It makes us different, and it also makes sure that our bar has 80 people in it for at least an hour before they go to the ferry. And we do a scratch card. We basically ask for everyone to do a scratch card where you can win your entry back for the night, and what's left over we use to pay for the ingredients, and then our volunteers make it with love. And so that's worked really, really well. But strangely, you should say about nutritionists, because now we've come under the NORA authorities now, and they've just taken on board a nutritionist from the US. And we've been asked if we can select a meeting for him to come down and talk to our youth in the year, with the view of one of our youth being taken under this guy's wing, where he will be provided with nutrition, with equipment, and so on and so forth. And that they're doing it for each of the motorcycle disciplines that come under NORA. So it's exciting stuff. Yeah, it's great.
Excellent.
You said earlier, Barry, you were talking about, obviously the British Speedway promoters and how that kind of works. Our first episode that we launched with in March was with Roddy McDougall, and I'm not sure if you read his book, the No Breaks book, but it was a really interesting one. It was all about that lost season with COVID. It was all about, kind of lots of talks with tracks and riders about the state of Speedway in this country at the moment. And actually what came across quite strongly, I think, was some criticism about the self-interest element of the running of the sport being handed to almost the bosses of the clubs, i.e. potential conflicts of interest and not always looking at the best for the sport overall. I mean, where are you at with this in terms of, obviously where you're at now sounds really exciting. You're able to put a lot on. We haven't even talked about the British Women's Speedway Championship, which I think we should talk about. But where are you at in terms of future thinking, or are you just enjoying where you are? In other words, are we likely to see Isle of Wight back in competitive racing, back in again if things change, or is that just not in your thinking right now?
Well, first of all, we do have really competitive racing on the island. Just because we're not in a league doesn't mean it's not competitive.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the point that do we want to go back to the National League or a higher league or even a foreign league? And the truth of it is, I'm more of the guy. I'm really happy with doing what we're doing, because we can put on 30 races in 2.5 hours, race, still have a kids halftime race. Everyone's entertained. We have great music, great atmosphere, and we progress. Where with going back to league racing, it's a whole different ball game. They don't allow you to have kids. They don't allow you to. So, for example, our second team, the Wizards, in a league meeting, I can't have them in the main event, right? But I could put on a challenge match, and then I can have 3 races of the challenge match, 2 races of the Wizards, 3 races of the challenge match, 2 races. And what does that mean? that means the Wizards gets to feel, you know, what it's like to be on parade with everybody. You know, how does it feel with the tracks fresh and grippy, as opposed to, you know, the shell just dragged down and a hard base perhaps, and all of that stuff that they need. And it also gives the riders a breather, and it gives the you know, the Wizards a breather. Of course, we have the biggest track in the country, 385 meters. It's a big old track to do 6 races in 25 minutes. And so I like this style much more than your 15 heats and then have some second half if you can be bothered, which is a shame, because a lot of clubs, in my view, take that approach, and they shouldn't, because our second halves when I was growing up watching Speedway was equally as entertaining. In fact, some of them were probably even rigged to make them entertaining than the main event, you know. And so we have to focus on what could be real value for money, and the costs with the BSPL versus the costs under what we do now, it's dramatically different. Not a little bit, dramatically different. And so go back to league racing, and if he wanted to do that, I would of course you know, support him if it was right. But equally, Martin's from Yorkshire, and he's, you know, he's tight, as they say, and so he's you know, he looks after the pennies, which makes sure that we look after our pounds. And so it has to be you know, we have to be able to cut our cloth, we have to be financially viable, and that's the challenge. Now, do I think that what we do now is as good as league racing? You bet your money I do. I think it's brilliant. But I would say that, of course, but I would say that, but I invite everybody to look at the feedback from our meetings for those that have attended it, and you'll see what people thought of it, and it was really good.
Yeah, I remember those types of races that you're talking about, where the second half was always the second half, and people always stayed for the second half. Whereas nowadays, it's the announcer even says, well, if you want to stay for the second half, stay, but if not, on you go.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, I would never have dreamed of leaving what I saw halfway through.
But you know what? I think we're now, and I always look forward, not backwards, as best I can, because I think that you've got to create a product for today's spectator, not yesterday's.
Yeah.
And everyone can bang on and say how brilliant it used to be. Well, you know, it did used to be, but that doesn't mean the racing was any better then. It used to be better because the crowds were there, and you went because 40 of your mates went. Now a lot of people go to Speedway by themselves, you know, and so you've lost your atmosphere. It's not about the quality of racing. You look at lots of old videos that you know, the races were spread apart, you know, and the tracks weren't so good, but there was 3,000 people there on the home straight, and so that's where your pleasure came from. That's why everyone will pay 65 quid to go to Cardiff. You know, it's not because the racing's that much better, or because it isn't. It's because you're with 65,000 other people, and you know, afterwards you're going to be in the bar with Speedway fans from across the country, not, you know, 35 on bend 1 and 60 on the back straight. But to go back to second halves, when I was doing second halves, I went to Oxford, Coventry, Swindon, occasionally to Eastbourne. None of them more than an hour. Now riders are driving 100 miles to get a second half, and they're treated poorly. We haven't got time to do it, you know, off you go. Yeah, and that's a disgrace. That's a total disgrace. And people that do second halves are really investing in their riders, their children. Look at you know, Ben Trigger. He travels the length and breadth of this country all of the time just for a skid. And so, you know, whilst that's commendable, and he does have Plymouth on his doorstep, you know, it's a shame that, you know, that more kids don't get the chance to go and ride their bikes at their local clubs, because I think local clubs should have their arms open, almost begging for people to come and do second halves. And I think you get local interest, get family base, all that kind of stuff, which really adds to the overall product that you put on display. And that's what it is. Speedway is a sport, but ultimately it's a show. It's entertainment, and people need to be entertained. And whether that's the crowd shouting, come on, you look at Glasgow fans, they always have their group of fans wherever they go. They're always loud, they're always chanting, they're always that. But how many other clubs? Yeah, how many other clubs do that?
No,
not many.
Not many. Right, there's definitely not many do that, and we do we are very local and we are prepared to travel
Yep, yep.
distances.
You know, and
Individually
things like, you know,
groups.
we've got to get fans interacted with their clubs and their riders. They need to have not just fill their name in a program, they need to identify with them. And so I always open my pits every meeting. I always hold, since we've left the BSPL, I hold a public rider briefing. So that means you can come and listen to what I'm telling the riders is how I expect them to behave and what I expect them to do. And do you know how many times that went wrong, where someone didn't do what we asked them to do or didn't behave properly? Zero. Why? Because I did it in front of fans. If it's just in front of me, it's just in front of Barry, you know, why would I care? The fans, they love me anyway. Do it in front of the fans. They know that that's what we expect from them. And it's worked. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, and it's promoting Speedway riders outside the Speedway Stadium as well. Yeah,
it is. We have a lot of tourists here, and people come and they've never been to Speedway before. They love it. You know, then I'm quite fearful of what they might see when they go somewhere else, you know, type thing, because I stand in front of my crowd every single meeting. Why? Because I believe in what they're going to see. I believe in the product. I believe in our team. I believe in the riders, and I know that they're going to have a great time. And I always say, whether it's a Speedway school or a Speedway meeting, if you like what you see, please tell the world. If there's something we can improve, tell myself or Martin, because we're the only people that can change it. We're the only ones. Putting it on social media doesn't help. You know, we're the only ones that can change it. And I'll give you a true casing story. We refurbished our burger bar, repainted it all, and I had signs: order here, collect there. I thought, run through, people go through quicker, right? What we didn't do was think, what happens if someone stood in front of it?
Yeah.
And someone wrote to me and said, I saw your burger bar, you got your order here on one side, your collection here, which was great, apart from when there was a queue. And I moved them and put them above. And you know what? He wrote to me and asked for me to change it. But when I did it, it went viral.
Yeah.
Because we'd listened and we'd done. And if I didn't agree with it, I could have written back and say, "That's thanks for that, you know, that observation. But the reason why we do it this way is ABC." But actually, I knew that he was right. So why wouldn't I change it? Because I improve then your experience when you come to our track.
So a lot of what seems to be not quite right with what's it called, the mainland speedway, or the mainstream speedway in the UK, it all comes back to the way the BSPL structured.
You mean? I think the problem is you have different clubs with different income streams, which means that so for 65 days a year, we'll make loads of money from hiring the track out to Speedway riders. We'll make plenty of money from stock cars or banger racing or flat tracking. Doesn't necessarily mind if they make, you know, £100 a meeting on the Speedway, whereas someone who's hiring the stadium only has 3 hours to get in to make the track ready, and then has to put on a substantial bills. It's a different business case, and so you have to have representation if you're not going to have it, people outside the sport on the management committee that have a say in that, and they need a strong say. And they should probably have, you know, someone now like Mildenhall or us even at the time, because, you know, make no bones about it, we're the smallest club in the sport. You know, that may be the case, but I tell you what, we've got the biggest heart, and we've got the, you know, and we are, you know, we cut our cloth. You know, we're a sustainable club, and whereas, you know, because my view is, why would you lose money putting on Speedway? Let's think about that. Why would you lose money? That means your product's not right. You can have the top 16 Speedway riders, but if you're losing money, your product's not right for your market, because not enough people are coming through the door to pay for it. And so if you do a comparison to UK Speedway and Polish Speedway, what we have to do is a marketing campaign to get new people through the door, because if you have organic growth of 1% in Poland and their crowd's 10,000, and they get 1% organic growth, that means you're going to have 100 people coming through the door new every week. If you have organic growth of 1% at our track, it means you're going to get 7 people coming through. So the growth in which they will grow is that much quicker. So the sport needs to have a real drive of, right, how do we get more people through the gate? How do we, let's look at our product. How can we make that more exciting? How can we get kids through the door? How can we? Not should John Armstrong be allowed to ride in the National League anymore? Because that's the sort of questions you have at the AGM. You shouldn't care who rides in the National League, because the truth of it is the likes of Drew Kemp, Nathan Ablett, they're going to ride in the Championship after one season in the National League anyway, because they're so talented. And half of these young kids coming through the youth development are going to be straight into the Championship after one league in the National League. So you need your core riders. You need people that are tick-alongs that will challenge these boys, but can make enough money to make it A, viable for themselves, and B, for their own self-worth, but equally the clubs that sustain them have to be viable. And that's no clubs equal no riders. Simple.
So maybe what's really needed is a few more different voices with a different viewpoint. I know what you mean about some individual promoters. They have different priorities. And I was talking to Ty, we've been doing it about this, and he was saying about some of the promoters that he knew that they were just looking at Speedway as a hobby. They didn't care if they made a profit, so they weren't really putting on a show for the punters, which was they cared if they made it, if they broke even, or they had a few quid in their back pocket, but they weren't really keen on making it bigger.
So I tell you something. And this is what I say this quite frequently on when I do this type of thing. When you come to our Speedway track, it's like you come to my home. So when you walk through that door, the person that meets you at the car park needs to be nice. Welcome to our car park. I hope you have a great meeting. When you pay to get in, that person needs to be nice. They're the two most important people any visiting Speedway fan or first timer will ever meet. If they get a crap welcome, then that's already set the tone of the meeting. Your stadium needs to be on point. Anyone that comes to our stadium will tell you our stadium is immaculate from the second you walk through that door. Our toilets are clean. We have soap in them. We have hot water. We have a baby changer. We have disabled facilities. We have our food packages are good. We have a good priced, clean and tidy bar, and we put on a good show. Why is that? Because you're coming to my house. I don't view it as a even if I did view it as a hobby. If you lose money, why would you do it? People don't believe in you. Don't do it. You want people that break even or reinvest as we do. But if you don't break even, your product isn't right for the cost of your product isn't right for your fan base, and so you need to change. It's as simple as that.
And Speedway in general definitely needs to increase the fan base.
And I think that they can, but the people need to be entertained, and whether that's I often read about too long tractor grading and stuff like that. But I have a strict thing here: 5 races, tractor grade, 3 laps off. That's it. And people know that that's when the tractor grade is going to be. Okay, sometimes someone might crash and they take an air fence out, and you have to do that. But when that happens, you then get 2 riders to go down in the crowd, 2 Speedway bikes. You tell fans what a Speedway bike is. It's let them sit on it. Or anything that you have a delay, then you need to interact with them. Your children in particular. And we have a kind of a code word that if I think it's going to be a long delay, we've got someone who does our half-time races and all the rest of it. I just call her on the radio, and she's down there and she's organising something for the kids to do, and that's how we operate. And I think that's not a difficult thing to implement. A lot of people say, oh, yeah, well, you have between 500 and 700 come to your Speedway events. It's not a great big crowd, blah blah blah. But my view is you could do that with 3,000 if you've got 4 people. You'd have to have stewards for that size of crowd anyway. Just teach them how to do stuff. It's not difficult. So I mean, you're right. The sport needs to focus, as we touched on earlier. How do we increase our fan base? And that's around characters, action. I mean, for us, we might, well, I don't know about you, but for me, I might enjoy someone breaking my track record and say, oh, well, you know what, that was poetry in motion. That was such great, everything was perfect on that lap. But would I rather see, you know, 3 MDL or 4 MDL of exactly the same standard overtaking each other, edge of your seat stuff a little bit, but a third of the speed? I know where I sit. You know, I want to watch action. I need characters, elbows, personality, close racing, overtaking every race. That's what we want. We don't want procession and lap records being broken because the track's absolutely perfect and a tuner's did the most perfect job on an engine. I mean, one thing that we did do while we were still in the BSPL was we put on the nice 2-valve challenge from Poland, where every engine was standard, brought over by Jawa, and the riders turned up with just their rolling chassis and fitted the engine. So basically, the riders drew lots for their engine and tyre and oil, and so it was all down. It was the ultimate test of skill. Test of skill, and you can watch it free on YouTube. On Speedway Portal, I highly recommend it, and then you'll see what we could do with the sport.
Yeah,
it does sound, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot there. There's frustration about the administration, but there's also, it sounds like there's room for, I'm not going to call it a think tank, but you know, we when we talked with Roddy, we talked about some sort of committee or some sort of idea of a body that maybe isn't necessarily the BSPL, but could be some sort of break off, but something that's just purely interested in the future of British Speedway, and in terms of whether that's sharing good ideas, good practice, and then helping to get that into the clubs almost outside of the infrastructure and the bureaucracy of the, you know, the setup of how it's run in this country, but almost some other way of influencing that without being in the tent, if you like, and not caught up with all of that. And the more you talk, it just sounds like there's an awful lot of ideas. We need to try and contain it and share it somehow.
I mean, there's 2 things to say to that. Is one, that if they do something like that, they need to be totally committed, and it needs to be part of their, you know, their mission statement of the business, the BSPL, because they did try to do it before, and they asked for every club to nominate a fan, and the fans would go to rugby and they would sit down and say, what do fans want? And they never, as far as I know, they never staged a meeting. Every club nominated their fan. I don't think it ever happened. So they should do something like that, and it definitely should happen. And I'm a firm believer of you know, you if you look on our website, you'll see at the end of every season I ask for feedback, and they can write exactly what they want about you know, how they feel the season went. But equally, it's surprising actually, because if I sit in front of people and I say, right guys, you know, our volunteers, what can we improve? They'll all look at me and go, oh, well, you know, it's great, blah blah blah. If I put on Facebook, right, I want feedback from it, it's interesting. It's like 60% of the volunteers will say, well, I think you could do this, but they won't actually say it, which is quite interesting. So you know, I think you know, your volunteers know, and you should encourage. You shouldn't be afraid of constructive feedback. You know, and even if it's something that is so out of, we can't have Ty Woodford riding in our Island Masters series because we couldn't pay his salary, and B, he's riding the Grand Prix. But you've given an answer and you've interacted with that person, and you haven't just ignored what they've written to you about. Because remember, it's a phrase often heard in football, isn't it? That the owners of a football club are just the custodians for the fans, and ultimately we're just the custodians for the fans. And that's quite an interesting thing around, you know, sponsorship and everyone wanting to see riders do really, really well. Well, I kind of try to encourage, you know, sponsorship to think about clubs more and more, because as I said earlier, with no clubs, there is no Speedway, and there's no Speedway riders. But just to touch back on implementing change, in our last year of the National League, I proposed a rule to be implemented in the cup meetings, which is basically the one that we've introduced here about team managers being able to select 2 races for handicap. And I proposed it. It was accepted by all the other promoters. And unfortunately, it was turned down because the SCB could not write a rule for it.
Okay.
And I don't mean that. I don't mean that.
No,
disrespectfully.
I get that. I'm in the
I
civil
can understand
service
that
and I
perhaps
know
they can't
people-
write a rule for it, but if we want to improve our sport, then we have to really have to think about stuff like what I proposed. I'm not saying I've got the answers for everything, but you should try everything. You should try everything in it, because if there's an old saying, isn't there? If you throw enough mud at the wall, something will stick, right? So you have to try anything that you think can improve the product, improve your stadium, improve your customer experience. And that goes from ensuring all your volunteers have radios to making sure that the person who's on the car park that day knows that when Mr. Jones drives in, she gives him or he gives him the best smile and welcome ever to make him feel valued and wanted, and you're going to have a great night tonight. Because if you say, all right, you here again, oh God, I'm not looking forward to so-and-so come in, we're going to get hammered, they expect to get thrashed, don't they?
Yeah.
We have to talk up our product, not talk it down, which is why I always look forward, not backwards.
We do. I end up in a lot of online arguments with that when people are really putting it down.
Yeah, you know, a lot of promoters don't use the forum. I actually go on the forum under my own name.
Right.
And I value what people write, actually, because I've learned so much, you know, from what people say they don't like and what they do like, whether I agree with it or not. And I read a lot of stuff on the forum, and sometimes I'll respond and I'll explain why for us that does work or it doesn't work, for example. And so I find that as a great source of information. And I know that a lot of promoters won't even look at it because they're going to see something negative about their club. And I understand that. I get that, because if someone says something negative about your club, especially if you know it isn't true, it really hurts you. You know, I can tell you how many hours we put on a speedway track, and I work full time as well. This isn't my income. This is my, you know, this is something that we do because we believe in the Isle of Wight. This is something that we do for the people of the Isle of Wight. It's something that we want to generate next speedway. So it's additional work for us, and we're so lucky that we have a great selection of volunteers that will help us and make sure that we put on the right show week in, week out. And you know, and they've all bought into. It's called the Warrior Way. You know, it's the Warrior Way. We do it the Warrior Way, and it's different.
It makes a lot of sense to me. It really makes.
And these things aren't that difficult, really. They're not that difficult to do. In fact, I work quite closely with Mark Phillips down at Plymouth. We talk at least 2 or 3 times a week, and he's implementing quite a lot of the stuff that we do up here to great success, I may add. You know, and I'm sure if he had the shackles released from him a bit more, he would do a lot more. So I just see that as the future. I used to live in Frankfurt, and I used to go and watch Speedway at Diedenbergen. And for €7, you would have Pee-wees, and this is a few years ago, Pee-wees, 125s races, 250, of which Robert Lambert was flying around there all the time at that time, Class B 500s, Class A 500s, and then go-karts with knobbly tires on. When we took over the Isle of Wight, I genuinely believed that's what I would be doing. That's what I wanted to do. I thought this is the way. And if you look at Australia, that's how they run them there. The US is very similar to, but here, 15 races, off you go. I don't understand why we can't look at ways in which we can increase the product and our show, because it is a show, and they need to remember that for the benefit of all, you know, especially weekend clubs. Definitely weekend clubs.
Yeah. I think it suffers now because a lot of clubs are now running to suit TV schedules and other things like that. And
I mean,
in charge of their own stadium.
I mean, that's very true. I mean, you know, TV schedules and TV money and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I understand all that, but and there's various, you know, the ways in which it's passed around and all that kind of stuff. But if I was the chairman of the BSPL, I wouldn't give any club any money for the from the TV's money. Do you know what I would do with it? I'd buy a track. Yeah. And then you've got an asset, and then you can borrow against an asset, and then you can have all of your championships at that club. You know, and the list goes on and on and on. but I understand that clubs also need revenue to survive, blah, blah, blah. So I just think from that perspective, there's probably better ways to spend the television money than actually paying on a exorbitant sign-on fee for a rider, or inflated money or whatever. But I know riders deserve every penny that they get, but equally, as I said several times today, no clubs equal no riders, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what we're going with football, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
It just sounds like a movement, doesn't it? It sounds like a movement, and really, to a degree, whether the BSPL looks at that or not, I mean, they're in charge, but I mean, there is an element, isn't there, where if enough people are like-minded and have got ideas about the future of the sport and ways that they can improve it, it could be quite irresistible, you know, almost getting those people who are on the forums, getting the people who are watching this week in, week out and have got these thoughts. You know, I'd love to share I hope that what happens with this episode is that this gets widely shared and that people involved in the running of tracks listen to some of what you've said and take some of it on board. Because there's some really interesting ideas there, and it just freshens it all up. So it does feel interesting, exciting. Look forward, not back, as you say. And what's exciting as well is that you're able to bring in the supply line. You're talking about the supply line, really, the youngsters coming in. Is there anything you wanted to say about the Women's Speedway Championship? I mean, obviously, we just had in the SGB2 now, where we've had you know, a female rider in there. You've got the Women's Speedway Championship. There are now some names coming through racing at you know, at national kind of league level, and hopefully go all the way up if that happens. Is that how far involved have you been there in the Isle of Wight on this to get the championship going there?
Well, it actually goes back a little bit further than that, in that I don't know if you will have seen it or maybe even heard about it, but I did a charity year called the Too Fat Submariners. And one of the events to raise money was, I actually come up with an idea, which was to do a ladies only speedway school. And I wrote to Charlie Webster, who was then presenting on Sky Sports, and said, I've got this idea, it's going to raise money. Are you interested in it? And I met with her, and she basically said, I'd love to do it. Blah, blah, blah. And we had Sama Malenko came along, and everyone said to me, oh, you would never make any money out of that. You won't raise anything at all. I could have sold that 100 times. 100 times. It was brilliant. It was sold out. And it was one of the best days of the charity year that we did. And so that was one of the things that made me think, and I did more ladies speedway schools with the Too Fat Submariners banner. But when the year finished, actually Alan Kreitcher, who's organising this event for us, took over the mantle really with it, and he's continued to run ladies only speedway schools. We here have ladies that ride speedway with us every week, and last year, when we finally sort of found ourselves in a position to do so, we actually put on probably the first heat of ladies only speedway racing ever in the UK, where we had 4 females riding against each other. Someone will probably say it happened somewhere else before, but I'm not sure. Maybe, but we were very proud of it. And we had 3 events, 3 races. And afterwards, Alan Kreitcher said to me, we should do a British Championship. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. Let's do it. And so we came up with the idea of the British Championship, which actually has got reasonably substantial already. With the prime aim of having ladies in a competitive environment on the last round. And so what does that do? What should that do? Well, that will give our current ladies a real target to aim for, you know, and will encourage them to be practicing more often than perhaps they might. We'll encourage them to actually stand up and be proud about themselves, because they are good. There's some brilliant spear riders, female spear riders out there riding now. But more importantly is to encourage the youngsters that are riding 125s and 250s at the moment, that there is a potential future for them in the sport. And hopefully if we can bring another 20 people or even another 1 person into the sport as a result of us doing this championship, then it will have done its job, and we'll have done a great show, and people are so proud of it, they're already backing it. So it's a win-win-win for me. It's a win-win-win for Alan Kreitzer as well, who's done a sterling job and been back in Ladies Speedway for years and years. And I hope it's a great success. And one way or the other, we will have a British champion by the end of this year. And if that is as successful as we hope it will be, next year we will expand it.
Excellent. Yeah, as I say, I've only had one ride on a Speedway bike. I've only had one ride on the Speedway bike, and it was in the times when you used to have a track spare.
Oh,
So
right, okay.
They let me go out at the end of the meeting with some of the reserves, and I rode the track spare. They let me go.
Well, we have at my first skid, we not only do we want to find the next superstars, but we want to allow anyone that wants to come and live the dream. So we have a broad array of Speedway machines, even from a Honda C90 step through in a full size frame for people that are real, learners of motorcycle riding, right the way through up to, National League standard race engines. So, and the school's very lucky to have Ricky Neal and Colin and all of the other volunteers that work on the bikes and make them ready for week in, week out for kids and adults to either have a taste or come and live the dream. We can provide everything from, steel shoe right the way through to your bike.
Hopefully you welcome 47-year-old big kids as well, because that could definitely be a new person coming along to you to have a go at that as well.
Get yourself down and bring your recorder. I guarantee you the night of your life.
Yeah, that sounds a great idea, to be honest. And before we round off, I mean, the other bit that's come across when kind of looking into some of what you're doing over there, really exciting, all the different competitions, the British Upright Championships and in August. And from yourself, getting Gordon Kennett to come along, which is another big coup, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if you know what you know about me, but Gordon Kennett and Mick Hanley are my childhood school heroes. Gordon Kennett because he went to Oxford and was the king of Oxford at the time, and Mick Hanley because he took me around on the back of a Speedway bike when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. So. And both Mick and Gordon have been over here to see our Speedway meetings and both loved the experience. In fact, when we brought Oxford over the last 2 seasons, Gordon was the Oxford team manager, which was wonderful for me. And so we also did last year, we come up with the idea of having upright races, Team Westlake versus Team GM versus Team Jawa. That was very successful. And then we sat down one night and I just thought, you know what, let's have the NORA British Upright Championship and see who actually signs up to do it. And, there's some quality coming out. Dean Felton, Mark Simmons, Gordon Kennett. I mean, there's some top riders about to hit the track. And 8 are seeded, but 8 have got to qualify. And I flipping can't wait. I'm really excited about that. It's just going to be and even better. They've been coming to my first skid, and these guys can still ride. Let me tell you, it's great. And the fact that they've bought into it and they understand what we're trying to achieve. It's not about I think Speedway should be upright. It's about I think we should have another discipline on display on show and make it a championship. Between lay down and uprights is like lay downs and sidecars. It's different, and so you ride them differently. So I hope that this will be the start of maybe even more upright meetings. I know that they do some now at Wade as well. They've been having them for years actually. They've had the veteran championship there, and so I'm really hopeful that this will be a great success, and we'll be having it as an annual event.
Excellent.
Sounds great. I mean, the sister podcast to this is Talking Balls, which is a snooker podcast. And I mean, on there you have a whole seniors tour. So they kind of, there is a whole different tournament, and again, played at the same venues, play the finals often at the Crucible. And you see your players move on from the main tour onto the senior tour, and there's a big call for it. And of course, whilst we don't want to look back, there's still a lot of supporters who think fondly of the riders who are now in their kind of 50s and 60s, many of whom could probably still get the bike going, couldn't they?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite funny. The guy who lives in Poole, who I actually went to school with, he's from Oxford, and he comes over here quite a lot. And he said to me, oh, "You couldn't introduce me to Gordon Kennett, could you?" I said, "Yeah, of course I will." And as I introduced him, he was physically shaking. I mean, that's what he meant to him.
Mhm.
And it's the same as
Wow.
I don't know if you saw as well. I own an ice racing bike, and I said to Bruce Cribb that he fancy having some laps around Smallbrook on my ice bike, and people were just delighted to see that as well, you know. And it's not about, oh yeah, it's Bruce Cribb, blah blah blah. It's about actually you've got an ice racing legend there on an ice bike on a speedway track, and it's part of the show. It's part of the show. It's all part of the show, and it makes the overall show that little bit better. You know, it's every color on the painting palette, and you need to mix all those colors to get a painting. Well, if you have lots of colors, which are your disciplines and your events, then you'll have a right show, which is your painting. And so much so, we're actually going to include flat track in our events this year as well. Can't wait for that. They've had higher sessions here when we've had, 40 riders. I mean, and that's a question. Why so many riders flat track and not speedway? When they initially the guy Anthony said to me, "How many riders can I bring?" I said, "Well, how many do you want?" He said, 40, 50, 60. I said, "Well, no, let's start at 15." He could get 60 riders to come from the mainland to ride flat track for a night here, no problem, and they ride all the time. So we need to look at some of the things that flat track's doing to encourage new riders to the sport. Is that GT 140s, what they're doing on the grass? Is that F2 Speedway? Is that standardization of engines? I don't know, but we need to start thinking now. It's already too late, but we need to start thinking now, and then we've got a chance.
Definitely, and I mean, certainly a forthcoming guest for us is going to be a chap who's going to talk to us about how they're trying to make things happen in Danish Speedway. So that's going to be really interesting to learn again from different places as to how they're trying to do the same stuff, I suppose. So, I mean, I think, Barry, all that remains really is to thank you. I feel like we could do another hour or two, and maybe we should do a part two at another point.
Yeah, anytime, just give me a shout.
But thanks very much, and obviously we'll look out for you. Obviously, in terms of the plug, I think it's the 23rd of June, isn't it? Is the first meeting back? Yeah,
23rd of June, and then we run every week through to September the 1st, and we've got a couple of weeks where we run 2 meetings in the same week in August, which is the peak holiday season.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. So we wish you well. I think we need to keep an eye on, and we need to keep talking about some of these ideas and plans and how we help to spread that, really. And a big voice, enough people, big voices, could be really interesting.
Yeah, anytime. Glad to come on, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you and tell you a little bit about what we do here. It is different, and we really enjoy it. And so far, it's so far so good.
Brilliant. So hopefully everyone's going to head to the Isle of Wight now.
Well, it's strange, actually. Last year, since we left the BSPL, our sponsorship increased, our fan base increased. We'll leave it at that. And if we increase again this year, so actually maybe there is a chance for this to be the right way, or some elements of it could be the right way to improve the product. Because if you go to a great speedway meeting, it's a great speedway meeting. It's still over quite quickly, but it's great, and nothing beats being with your speedway friends in that environment. The 2-point away win, the trip back is glorious. The 25 point loss at home, it's awful. So you share those emotions, and so when you get that, and you get that show and it's perfect, then it's great. But that doesn't happen all the time, and so you need to make every week as entertaining, even if the speedway racing isn't as entertaining, if that makes sense. And so by making the show, then every week is different, and every week should be, as I always say, a fun-filled family adventure.
Yeah.
Perfect. A perfect way to end the podcast episode. Thank you very much, Barry. We will keep.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Cheers, Lynn. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Yep, bye.